In the summer of 1979, a cassette tape landed on the desk of the detective hunting the Yorkshire Ripper. But before we hear what was on that tape, the detective believed the voice belonged to the man who had already killed 11 women. He was wrong. The voice wasn't the killer's. It belonged to a man who had never murdered anyone. And by the time anyone admitted that 3 more women would be dead. This is the story of how a hoax became a shield, not of a genius criminal mastermind, but of a man who was bored, drunk, and on the dole. And the institution that handed him the shield was the largest, most expensive murder investigation Britain had ever run. So how did a nobody fool all of them? The answer begins with a killer they already had in their files and let go. 9 times. 9 times they questioned him. 9 times they let him walk. His name was Peter Sutcliffe. Peter Sutcliffe was a lorry driver from Bradford, quiet, married, unremarkable, until October 1975. In the early hours of 30 October 1975, Wilma McCann left a pub in Leeds. She never made it home. She was found the next morning on a patch of playing fields, struck from behind with a hammer. Then it happened again, and again. 4 women in 14 months. The press gave him a name, the Yorkshire Ripper. By 1977, fear had redrawn the map of northern England after dark. Women were told to stay inside. A curfew was suggested for women, not for the man killing them. Into this fear walked one man, handed the case of his career. Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield took personal command of the Ripper inquiry. Oldfield was experienced, driven, and desperate for a breakthrough. He told his team, "The killer will make a mistake. We just have to be ready to catch it." And a name kept surfacing. Peter Sutcliffe was interviewed for the first time in 1969 for an entirely different assault. He was let go then, too. By 1977, Sutcliffe's name was on a list of men connected to a suspicious £5 note. He was on a list of 300 names. He was interviewed. He was released. He went home to his wife in Bradford. He killed again that autumn. In June 1977, Jane MacDonald, 20 years old, not a sex worker, was killed in Leeds. That detail mattered. Until then, police had quietly framed the Ripper as a danger only to prostitutes. MacDonald's murder shattered that framing publicly, but the institutional reflex didn't change. It just added more names to the list. And somewhere in that pile, Sutcliffe's file kept sinking. By early 1978, Oldfield was running the most expensive manhunt in British history, and he was no closer to an answer. Then, on the 8th of March 1978, the post arrived. Inside was a letter signed Jack the Ripper. It was addressed personally to Oldfield. It taunted him, and it claimed to be from the killer. Oldfield read it once, then again. The letter knew things, or seemed to. It referenced a killing in Preston, 1975, that police believed the Ripper had committed. That detail was not, supposedly, public. Joan Harrison, a 26-year-old sex worker, had been killed in Preston in November 1975. Her case was unsolved. Police had quietly linked her death to the Ripper series. The letter seemed to confirm it. The only problem, the link was wrong. Joan Harrison had not been killed by Peter Sutcliffe. The letter had simply guessed, and guessed wrong. But in 1978, no one knew that yet. A second letter arrived. Then a third, this one, to the Daily Mirror. And then, in June 1979, came the tape. On the 17th of June 1979, a cassette landed at West Yorkshire Police Headquarters. A voice filled the room. "I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me." It went on. "I have the greatest respect for you, George. But Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started." The voice even insulted Oldfield's own men. "I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they? The tape ended with a pop song. A snippet of Andrew Gould's "Thank You for Being a Friend," a strange, almost playful sign-off. Oldfield made his decision. He believed it. Personally, completely. The voice, he said, was the killer's. And he ordered the hunt to pivot north. Linguists were brought in to map the accent. They placed it in Sunderland, specifically a district called Castletown. 40,000 men in the Sunderland area were investigated, interviewed, voice tested. None of them was the Ripper, because the Ripper lived 100 miles south in Bradford and spoke with a Yorkshire accent. But the science seemed to confirm itself. Forensic tests on the hoax envelopes found the sender's saliva carried a rare blood group marker. The same marker found at Ripper crime scenes. A trait shared by only 6% of men. To police, that was proof. Two different men. The same 6%. The hoaxer and the killer happened to share one rare biological trait, and that accident saved Sutcliffe. No one in the inquiry wanted to hear otherwise. The FBI had already warned it was a hoax. Robert Ressler, the FBI's profiler, heard the tape and flagged it immediately. The voice, he said, was a blatant hoaxer, not the killer. West Yorkshire police filed it and moved on. The linguists themselves changed their minds within weeks and told police. No one listened. A confidential directive went out to detectives in September 1979. Disregard any suspect without a Wearside accent. The instruction was explicit. If he didn't sound like the man on the tape, he wasn't your man. It was a filter, and Peter Sutcliffe walked straight through it. Because Peter Sutcliffe from Bradford did not have a Wearside accent. He was interviewed again and released again. 4 of his 9 interviews came after the tape. Each time, the accent cleared him. In July 1979, a young detective wrote something different. Detective Constable Andrew Laptew interviewed Sutcliffe at his home and didn't like what he found. He wrote it all up. Laptew's report said there was good evidence this man was the Ripper. It was downgraded the same day. His superiors rejected it. Sutcliffe's Yorkshire accent didn't match the tape. His handwriting didn't match the letters. Case closed again. 3 weeks before Laptew's report, Sutcliffe had killed again. Josephine Whittaker, 19, Halifax. She was a clerk, walking home across Savile Park Moor on the 4th of April 1979. She had nothing to do with sex work. Whittaker's murder proved the Ripper could strike anyone, anywhere, and the tape had told police to look 100 miles away. The hoaxer, meanwhile, was starting to feel guilty. Twice, John Humble anonymously phoned police to tell them they had been hoaxed. The calls were logged and forgotten. One of those calls came on the 14th of September 1979, 12 days after Barbara Leach was murdered. Barbara Leach, 20. A student. She had been walking home from a pub in Bradford. Sutcliffe dragged her behind a low wall. A detective in another force had already seen the problem. A Northumbria police inspector had flagged the hoax because the letters never mentioned a victim whose body lay hidden, undiscovered, in Bradford. Yvonne Pearson, hidden under a discarded sofa. Her body would not be found for 2 months. The hoaxer didn't mention her because he didn't know. The inspector's report was sent to West Yorkshire Police. It was filed and ignored. Sutcliffe killed again that autumn, and again the following year. His final victim was a student named Jacqueline Hill, Leeds. November 1980. She was 20. She was attacked on a main road walking home from a bus stop. By then, the inquiry had been running for 5 years. Sutcliffe had been questioned 9 times. 3 women had died since the tape. Then a friend of Sutcliffe's finally did what police had not. On the 25th of November 1980, Trevor Birdsall walked into a police station and named Sutcliffe. He had been the getaway driver in Sutcliffe's first assault back in 1969. Birdsall's tip, like every other, disappeared into the pile. Sutcliffe was caught by something far smaller than a manhunt. On the 2nd of January 1981, in Sheffield, he was stopped for driving with false number plates. A routine stop. A probationary constable. False plates. The officer was a probationer named Robert Hydes. He ran the plates. They didn't match the car. Sutcliffe was arrested on the spot. He was transferred to Dewsbury Police Station into the hands of West Yorkshire Police. The next day, a sergeant acted on a hunch. Sergeant Robert Ring went back to the spot where Sutcliffe had been stopped. Behind the tank, he found them: a knife, a hammer, a length of rope. Sutcliffe had hidden them when he slipped away to relieve himself. He had told officers he was bursting for a pee and stashed the tools behind the tank. At the station, he hid a second knife in the toilet cistern. When he was finally stripped and searched, they found something stranger still. Underneath his trousers, he was wearing a jumper. An inverted V-neck jumper pulled over his legs, the neck exposed, the elbows padded for kneeling. Confronted with the tools, Sutcliffe stopped pretending. He confessed. Over the following day, he calmly described every attack. He said God had told him to do it. He said the women he killed were filth. He said he had no choice. And when asked about the letters and the tape, he gave a different answer. He denied sending them. And then he called them something else. Divine intervention. Sutcliffe called Wearside Jack divine intervention, a gift from God that gave him time to kill. 3 women had been killed in that gifted time: Whittaker, Leach, Hill. 3 names the hoax helped make into victims. The man who gave Sutcliffe that gift was still out there. The government ordered a review. The man who ran it was Inspector of Constabulary Lawrence Byford. Byford went back to the beginning. His report, delivered in 1981, was devastating and buried for 25 years. When it was finally released in 2006, it confirmed what survivors had said all along. Byford found Oldfield's fixation on the tape had been wanting. He had ignored the FBI, the linguists, the survivors. The hoax had been used not as a lead, but as a filter. The tape became a point of elimination. Anyone who didn't sound like it was cleared. That was how a Yorkshire-speaking killer walked free. For 26 years, the man behind the voice was unknown. Then a cold case team in West Yorkshire reopened the file. Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Gregg led the review. He started with the envelopes. Gregg's team located a fragment of the gummed seal from one of the original envelopes. Inside the seal, saliva. And inside the saliva, DNA. The Forensic Science Service in Wetherby extracted a DNA profile from the seal. They ran it against the national database. The match was to a man arrested in 2001 for being drunk and disorderly in Sunderland. His name was John Samuel Humble, a 50-year-old unemployed labourer, a chronic alcoholic, living on the Ford estate in Sunderland, a mile from where police had once searched for Wearside Jack. The odds of the DNA matching anyone else were 1 in a billion. On the 18th of October 2005, police knocked on his door. Humble and his brother Henry were so drunk the officers had to wait almost a day to interview him. When he sobered up, he had to be told where he was. He was in a police station in West Yorkshire, 100 miles from home. And he had no idea. He denied it at first. He pleaded not guilty. Then, in February 2006, he admitted it. When asked why, his answer was almost too small to believe. He said he had been bored, on the dole, fascinated by Jack the Ripper, and he hated the police. The hatred went back to 1975, when he had been jailed for assaulting a police officer. He had served 3 months for that, and never forgave the force. The hoax, his lawyers argued, was a stupid, drunken act. His defense said it was only wasting police time, not perversion of justice. The judge disagreed. On the 21st of March 2006, Humble was sentenced to 8 years for perverting the course of justice. He was released on license in 2009, having served half his sentence. He died in July 2019, aged 63, under a new name. But the reckoning he left behind ran deeper than one man. The Byford report changed how every British police force would run major inquiries. Incident rooms were computerized. Cross-referencing was automated. No single voice would ever again be allowed to clear a suspect. The Sunderland letters had cost the Northumbria force alone more than £600,000. But the real cost was never money. It was the 3 women killed after the tape arrived, and the women who survived and were not believed. Olive Smelt, attacked in Halifax in 1975, had told police the man was local. They ignored her. The survivors' evidence and the photo fits close to Sutcliffe's face were rejected. Photo fits that looked like Sutcliffe were set aside because they didn't look like the voice on the tape. Belief, once committed, became a machine for rejecting the truth. That is the part no single villain explains. It wasn't only Humble's lie. It was an institution that needed a story and chose the wrong one. Once the story was set, every fact was bent to fit it. The 6% blood match, the Preston letter, the accent. Each one confirmed what they already believed. That is how a hoax survives, not by being clever, but by being useful. Humble's lie gave the inquiry exactly what it wanted: a face, a voice, a place. And the killer, watching, kept walking the streets. Sutcliffe later said he had followed the hoax coverage in the papers. He watched the police chase a ghost. And he kept killing. By the time the tape was exposed as a hoax, the case had already broken by a probationer, a torch, and a set of false plates. The investigation that caught Sutcliffe had nothing to do with the manhunt that was supposed to. The largest inquiry in British history caught its quarry by accident on a traffic stop 100 miles from its incident room. And the man whose voice had saved the killer was never even a suspect. Humble lived a mile from where police had searched for Wearside Jack. His neighbors were interviewed. He was not. He had even tried to confess and been ignored. The hoaxer called the hoax in. The killer thanked the hoaxer for it. And the police ignored them both. Which leaves the question the whole story turns on. Was John Humble a murderer? The court said no. The families of the last 3 victims were never so sure. Sutcliffe himself never hesitated. He called the hoax divine intervention. The court recorded it. Humble read it back years later in his cell. One bored man, one believing detective, one shield made of audio tape. The lesson isn't that a hoax fooled the police. It's that the police needed to be fooled. And that need cost 3 women their lives. Josephine Whittaker, Barbara Leach, Jacqueline Hill. Not numbers, names. The tape that damned them sat in a desk for 26 years before it named its maker. The voice was never the killer's. It was a drunk on the dole who wanted to feel important for 5 minutes. And the institution that empowered him was the largest of its kind in the country. Scale is not the same as competence. A manhunt is only as good as the question it refuses to stop asking. The Yorkshire Ripper case asked one question over and over. Does he sound like the man on the tape? And the answer 9 times was no. 9 times the answer was no. 9 times the killer walked out, until a probationer stopped him for a number plate. The hoax didn't catch the Ripper. It didn't even slow him down. It sped him up, and then it sat in a drawer and waited. 26 years. Until a cold case officer pulled a fragment of an envelope from a lab in London. And the voice finally had a name. John Samuel Humble. Wearside Jack. A man who, for 5 minutes of notoriety, lent a serial killer the best alibi he ever had. The tape is in an evidence archive now. The case files are public. The Byford report is released. The names of the dead are recorded. But the question the story leaves is not about Humble. It's about the moment an institution decides it knows the answer and stops looking at anything that says otherwise. That moment has a date. September 1979. The memo went out. Disregard anyone who doesn't sound like the tape. After that memo, Sutcliffe was effectively untouchable. Not because he was clever, because the system had agreed to clear him. The hoax didn't have to be brilliant. It only had to be believed. And belief, once it wears a uniform and writes a memo, calls itself evidence. That is the real story of Wearside Jack. Not a hoax that fooled the police, but a police force that fooling itself and called the hoax a clue. And the cost of that self-deception was counted in names: Whittaker, Leach, Hill. The tape is silent now. The voice that once filled an incident room sits in an archive, tagged and filed. But the question it asked still hangs in the air. How does an institution that big, that funded, that staffed, choose the wrong story and refuse to let it go? The Byford report gave one answer: the need for a narrative. The personal investment of one senior officer. The mechanical filtering of every lead through one assumption. And one statistic that should have been a warning. 6%. The chance that 2 unrelated men shared the same blood trait. The coincidence that looked like proof. A 1 in 16 coincidence. Treated as a certainty. Coincidence is not evidence. But under pressure, it dresses the part. And by the time the costume slipped, 3 women were dead. The case is closed. The killer is dead. The hoaxer is dead. The detective is dead. What survives is the record. The Byford report. The court transcripts. The names of 13 women and the 3 the hoax helped add. And 1 cassette tape. A man's voice in a Wearside accent thanking a detective for not catching him. It was never the killer's voice. It was the sound of an institution choosing the answer it wanted, and a killer walking home in the dark. Cut to black.